in the entire history of the NBA. Across more than 70 years of professional basketball, thousands of players, and countless record-breaking seasons, exactly one player has ever led the league in both scoring and assists in the same year. One player in the history of the entire sport. Not Oscar Robertson, not Magic Johnson, not LeBron James, not Stephen Curry. One man, one season, one record that has stood for over 50 years. And that nobody, not one person who has ever played this game at the highest level, has come anywhere close to matching. His name was Nate Archibald. And most casual basketball fans today couldn't tell you the first thing about him. That's the reason we're here. Because the story of Tiny Archibald is not just about a basketball record. It's about where he came from, what he survived, what he built, and why. Even after the games were over, he kept giving back to the same streets that shaped him. This is one of the greatest stories in the history of basketball, and it starts in one of the hardest places in America, the Patterson housing projects in the South Bronx, New York. One of the most economically devastated neighborhoods in the entire country. In the 1950s and 1960s, it was a place where the circumstances of your birth could very easily determine the ceiling of your life, and where that ceiling was often tragically low. Nathaniel Archibald was born and raised right in the middle of it. He was the oldest of 7 children, growing up in a 2-bedroom apartment with his family at 14 years old, an age when most kids are worrying about school and friendships. Nate Archibald became the effective head of his household when his father walked out and left the family behind. Think about what that means for a moment. 14 years old, 7 kids. A 2-bedroom apartment in one of the most troubled neighborhoods in the country. The drugs and violence that destroyed so many people around him were not abstract threats. They were daily realities on the streets directly outside his front door. Archibald would later say that the people around him who were caught up in that life were always looking for company. They wanted others to come down with them. And basketball, the one thing he was genuinely passionate about, was what kept him pointed in a different direction. But here is where the story gets even harder before it gets better. Archibald was not immediately a star. He was small. He was painfully shy. He lacked confidence. And in his sophomore year of high school, he tried out for the basketball team and didn't make it. He was cut from his high school basketball team. The player who would one day lead the entire NBA in both scoring and assists was told he wasn't good enough to play for DeWitt Clinton High School. He nearly dropped out of school entirely. And if one person hadn't intervened at exactly the right moment, we might never have known his name at all. His name was Floyd Lane, a community sports director who knew the DeWitt Clinton coach. Personally, Lane went to bat for a shy, undersized kid from the projects who had just been cut from the team. He convinced the coach to give Archibald another look. That second look changed everything. Archibald made the team in his junior year. By his senior season, he had made the all-city team. The transformation was real, but his grades were not strong enough to earn a major college scholarship, so he left New York for the first time in his life to attend Arizona Western Community College. 1 year there. Then a scholarship to the University of Texas at El Paso, where he averaged 20 points a game across 3 seasons and began to announce himself in postseason All-Star games. He scored 51 points in the 1970 Aloha Classic. He averaged nearly 40 points per game across 5 postseason exhibitions. The Cincinnati Royals selected him in the second round of the 1970 NBA draft. Not a high pick, not a celebrated selection, just a small, speedy point guard from the South Bronx, coming out of a program that wasn't considered a basketball powerhouse, being given a chance by a franchise that wasn't considered a league powerhouse either. What happened next took years to fully materialize. But when it did, it was historic. The 1972 to 1973 NBA season, the franchise had relocated from Cincinnati and was now the Kansas City Omaha Kings. And Nate Archibald, in the middle of the kind of professional breakthrough that most players spend their entire careers waiting for, did something that has never been done before or since. In 80 games, Archibald averaged 34 points and 11.4 assists per game. He led the entire NBA in scoring. He led the entire NBA in assists at the same time, in the same season. And before you process that too quickly, stop. Think about what that actually requires. To lead the league in scoring, you need to be taking on enormous offensive responsibility. You need to be attacking, finishing, pulling up, creating your own shot, demanding the ball in critical moments. Scoring 34 points per game in the NBA is an extraordinary individual burden. To lead the league in assists, you need to be making everyone around you better. You need to be reading the defense, finding the open man, sacrificing your own scoring opportunities to create easier ones for your teammates. Great passers often score less because they're prioritizing the collective over the individual. These two things are, almost by definition, in tension with each other. The highest scorers in NBA history are rarely the highest assist men. The greatest playmakers rarely carry that kind of scoring load. The skills overlap, But the mindset required to dominate both categories simultaneously is something that almost no player in basketball history has been able to sustain even for a single game, let alone a full season. Archibald did it for 80 games, and nobody has done it since, not in 50 years of professional basketball, not once. He was named to the All-NBA first team that season. He played in his first All-Star game. At 24 years old, Nate Archibald from the Patterson Projects was one of the most dominant individual performers the sport had ever seen. And then, in the way that so many great stories are interrupted, life came back to remind him where he came from. In the middle of his historic season, Archibald flew home and found one of his brothers incoherent and hallucinating from a drug overdose. The fame, the records, the all-star selection, none of it protected his family from the realities of the South Bronx. Two of his brothers eventually came to live with him in Kansas City, where he helped them rebuild their lives. Another underwent rehabilitation with Archibald's direct support. He never talked about this to gain sympathy. He handled it quietly, the way someone does when responsibility has been part of their identity since they were 14 years old. The oldest of 7. The one who stayed. The one who figured it out. That wasn't just his basketball role, that was who he was. The seasons that followed were productive but complicated. An Achilles tendon injury cut his 1973-74 season short. He recovered, came back strong, led Kansas City to their first winning record in years and their first playoff appearance of his career. Then another productive season. Then a trade to the New York Nets. Then a severe foot injury. Then another Achilles tear before he'd played a single game for the Buffalo Braves. 3 years. Multiple serious injuries. Team after team. By the time the Boston Celtics acquired him before the 1978-79 season, one NBA general manager summed up the prevailing sentiment bluntly. Nobody would have taken him. He was 30 years old, had a difficult reputation, a big contract, and appeared to have lost everything that had made him special. The basketball world had written Nate Archibald's obituary, and then something unexpected happened. Every summer, Archibald went back to the South Bronx, back to the Patterson Projects, back to the playgrounds where he had grown up, to run programs, counsel kids, and stay connected to the neighborhood that had shaped him. Even at the height of his career, he never stopped going back. And in the summer, after his most frustrating season in Boston, overweight, out of form, his role undefined, his career seemingly fading, he found himself on those same playgrounds, not giving advice, receiving it. The kids he was there to counsel told him not to worry. They told him not to get down. They told him that Celtics needed him and that he could do it. A group of kids from the South Bronx, the same kind of kids he had once been, were the ones who gave him the confidence to go back and try again. He returned to Boston for the 1979-80 season transformed. The Celtics didn't need him to score 34 points a game. They had Larry Bird, Dave Cowens, and Cedric Maxwell for that. What they needed was someone who could run the offense, control the pace, and make everyone around him better. Archibald became exactly that player. His scoring average dropped to 14 points a game, but his assists jumped back to 60-71 for the season, his highest total since his record-breaking year in Kansas City. He was named an all-star again. The Celtics went 61-21 and were suddenly one of the best teams in basketball. The full revival came the following season. The 1980-81 Celtics went 62-20. Archibald averaged over 35 minutes per game running a disciplined Boston offense, finished 5th in the league in assists, and was named MVP of the All-Star game. And then, in his 12th season in the NBA, after everything that had come before, Tiny Archibald won an NBA championship. The Celtics beat the Philadelphia 76ers in 7 games in the Eastern Conference Finals, one of the most intense playoff series of the era. Then they defeated the Houston Rockets in 6 games in the NBA Finals. A kid from the Patterson Projects in the South Bronx, who almost dropped out of high school, who was cut from his high school basketball team, who played through injuries and trades and public doubt and the private weight of a family that needed him, standing in the middle of a championship celebration in Boston at 32 years old. Nate Archibald was finally an NBA champion. The championships and the records are the part of Tiny Archibald's legacy that shows up in history books, and they deserve to be there. Career that produced 1641 points, 476 assists, 6 all-star selections, and the one statistical achievement in NBA history that nobody has ever replicated. That legacy is extraordinary by any measure. But the part of his story that matters most to Archibald himself has nothing to do with any of those numbers. After retiring in 1984, he went back to New York. He ran basketball schools for underprivileged kids. He served as athletic director at the Harlem Armory Homeless Shelter, one of the largest in the city, for years. He was honored by the mayor of New York for his community work in 1993. He coached at the collegiate and professional development level. He worked in the NBA's community relations department. He never stopped going back to the same neighborhoods, the same playgrounds, the same kinds of kids he had once been. There is something important in that. A lot of athletes come from difficult circumstances and use their success as a way of leaving those circumstances permanently behind. Archibald did the opposite. He let his success become a reason to stay connected. to keep showing up, keep showing kids that there was a path, keep being the Floyd Lane to someone who needed a second chance at exactly the right moment. He was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in 1991. Deservedly, completely. The only player in NBA history to lead the league in both scoring and assists in the same season. 50 years later, still standing alone, a kid who was cut from his high school team, who almost dropped out of school, who grew up as the responsible one in a household that needed him before he was old enough to drive, and who turned all of that into one of the most singular careers in the history of professional basketball. Nate "Tiny" Archibald, the pride of Patterson, the one who made the record, and the one who kept going back. That is a legacy worth remembering. If this story meant something to you, hit like and subscribe. And drop a comment letting me know which legend you want us to cover next, because the history of this game is full of names that deserve more attention than they get. See you next time.